But I am excited to have some time to talk with you all today about some of the problems we're facing with climate change and the actual science behind it, but even more importantly, the opportunities before us and how if we invest in our future, we can build a stronger labor movement, create livable wage jobs, and ensure a better world for our children and future generations. So I want you to join me in welcoming Judy Tweet, who is with UAW 4121, and she's going to share some of the science behind what we know about climate change.
Thank you, April. Before I jump into my slides, I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington. My family immigrated here, and in the late 1800s and worked for 3 generations as loggers on the Kitsap Peninsula. I'm now a member of UAW 4121 at the University of Washington, and I study climate. I wanted to choose this line of work because I wanted to know how this problem is going to affect us here in the Northwest and how we can make smart, fair solutions to combat that. I'm also a proud member of the King County Labor Council Climate Caucus. We work together to advocate a worker-centric approach to a just transition, and that's what we're here about today. This is actually the only science slide that I'm going to share with you today, and this figure is from NASA. This shows the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last 400,000 years. We get this data from ice cores in Greenland and Antarctica. You can see ice ages in this figure. You can also see that the level of carbon in the atmosphere now is way above normal, and it's unprecedented in the geologic record. This matters to us because it has huge impacts on our climate. Traps heat close to Earth's surface. Carbon dissolves in the oceans and turns into carbonic acid, acidifying the oceans, which impacts our shellfish industry. It also affects severe weather, droughts, fires, and sea level rise. The Gulf Coast is particularly susceptible to this. You can see this is damage from Hurricane Katrina. As sea level rises, storm surges get worse. Next slide, please. Can we do that? Next slide. So sea level has risen about a foot since the 1800s. That's because oceans are warming and glaciers are melting. Next slide. As we pump more carbon into the atmosphere, this problem gets worse. Next slide. Here in Washington, we know what it looks like when we have warm winters and hot, dry summers because we experienced this in 2015. There was record low snowpack during the winter, and then we had a series of heat waves and wildfires that scorched eastern Washington. You see here in this figure a mother, Kira Leeper, who's trying to protect her infant's lungs from soot. She lives in Spokane, and she was seeking refuge at the Transit Authority station because there was so much smoke in the air. Matthew Hebner here was in Wenatchee and experienced the fires. He's going to tell you what that looked like on the ground.
Next slide. So we now have 5 seasons. It goes spring, summer, fire, fall, and winter. So fire is now a season. So the Wenatchee Sleepy Hollow fire started in 2015. It started as a little fire and it spread incredibly. This is a picture I took with my cell phone, and this is the Bluebird facility. So it's an apple packing shed. Hundreds of jobs were lost, and mostly from our immigrant communities. And those plumes of smoke you're seeing, that's a combination of ammonia and nitrogen. So those were the tanks exploding. So that created a cloud of noxious gases, so we had a great combination of fire and cinder raining down from the sky, which is what sparked this, mixed with noxious gases. So once this happened, then the law enforcement started coming door to door, block by block, and handing out evacuation notices. You get an evacuation notice and you're told to leave. Leave your home and pray to God it doesn't burn. And that's a terrifying proposition for anybody. So that was our experience in Wenatchee. Thank you.
Next slide. There are other impacts on the state. So when we have record low snowfall in the winter, then we have less stream flow in the summer. The Seattle Times reported that salmon in 2015 were dying because the Columbia River was warmer than normal, and you see them here in this image. They have this white fungus on their skin from those warm temperatures. Ski resorts like the Stevens Pass Ski Resort have already invested in snow guns to blow fake snow onto the mountains because they're not getting enough real snow. This also affects our reservoirs, which are necessary to irrigate eastern Washington farms and provide clean, cheap hydropower, which generates so much of our economy here in Washington state. Next slide. So that's hard to hear, and it's can be quite overwhelming. The good news is, through federal science funding, we've been investing in clean energy technology research for over 40 years. We have dropped down the price of clean energy so that it's economically viable and effective. What's frustrating is that some of the world's largest manufacturers of solar and wind are not here in the United States. In this image here, you see a worker painting the world's largest wind turbines. Next slide. And those are in China. China is beating us in the rapid manufacture and deployment of solar and wind. Next slide. So we're here to argue and fight as labor for clean energy investment in Washington state that can bring us into the 21st century energy economy, lower carbon pollution, improve our health, and create family wage jobs. If this seems like a tall order, if this seems like a tall order, we just need to look to our past because we've done this before. Next slide. After the Great Depression, unemployment in Washington state was higher than the national average. It was over 30%. There were massive homeless camps in Seattle. But by 1935, with the construction of the Bonneville Dam just up the river, the Grand Coulee Dam and other public works projects, thousands of people were working on clean energy hydropower that lifted families out of poverty. There were ripple effects with this. Because we had abundant and cheap hydropower here in Washington, Boeing was able to get the energy-intensive aluminum that it needed to generate aircraft during World War II, and that made Seattle the industrial city that it is today. So we know what happens when we invest in clean energy here in Washington. I'm going to pass it off now to April to talk about the opportunity we have with the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy.
Woo! Thank you, Judy. Next slide, please. Awesome. So like Judy said, we've done it before and we can do it again. By putting a price on carbon emissions, that's an essential part of the solutions we need. We can generate more than $1 billion and invest that money into equitable transition to a clean energy economy, thereby reducing emissions, protecting against climate impacts, and creating jobs. And there's precedent for this. You might remember in 2010 when we negotiated Referendum 52. How many of you remember that? Some of you? It's a long time ago? That's okay. Let me remind you. That Referendum 52 was a ballot measure that would have both created livable wage jobs, construction hours tied to a project labor agreement, and resulted in energy retrofits for all of our schools. And how many of you remember ST3? Yeah, that's right. ST3, which passed last year, results in hundreds of thousands of construction hours tied to a project labor agreement. But it was also an amazing piece of climate policy. Because we know as labor that we have to be at the table from the beginning if we want to ensure that this new economy doesn't leave anyone behind. Because this clean energy economy is coming our way. And these will either be Walmart-style, Uber-style jobs, or these will pay livable wage jobs that will lift the standards for all of the workers in this state. And make no mistake, again, this is an emerging economy, and it's exceeding all expectations. I could bore you with the numbers and the facts and figures around solar and wind power production, and I'm happy to talk to you about that during lunch or at any time. But the fact is, what they projected 10 or 15 years ago in terms of what was possible behind solar and wind power, we have exceeded those projections by 16 and 17 times. So we know that the solutions are, next slide please, investing in clean energy, clean water, and healthy forests, protecting energy-intensive trade-exposed businesses, ensuring that labor and communities of color have a say in those investments, and protecting disproportionately impacted communities and workers. That's the cornerstone of the policy that we're looking at. for our Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy work. And now I want to turn it over to Matthew Hepner, who is the Executive Director of the Certified Electrical Workers of Washington, and he's going to share some examples of how clean energy economy is leading to more jobs and creating more opportunities.
Thank you, April. So don't worry, I come bearing good news. So, with a few tweaks, there's a very real possibility right now that Washington could be the first state to be fossil fuel free for energy generation. Slide, please. We are currently producing enough to serve all of Washington between hydro, nuke, solar, and wind. We have the energy. But just because we are producing enough does not mean we are ready to become fossil fuel free quite yet. Before we make it a reality, we need, one, a better deal with Canada on the Columbia River Treaty, so we can have more of our energy back and available for Washingtonians. And we also need to keep pushing smart grid and energy efficiency measures, which are having very meaningful impacts upon the grid. Now, when it comes to renewable energies, we are at a technological bottleneck. The bottom line is solar really sucks at night, and wind is variable and hard to predict. It makes it unreliable as a steady source of energy. What that does, that raises your operating costs and your maintenance costs. So neither is a source of consistent power. We need our energy sources to be stable and consistent. Think of the grid like a tightrope walk. We have to keep it balanced. So getting energy produced by these renewable sources back onto the grid in predictable amounts is paramount. And let's keep in mind, everyone, electricity, it doesn't have a shelf life. You just can't stick it in the wire and use it when you need it. It has to go somewhere immediately. So, but if we can take the energy that we are creating from our renewables and store it and take it back onto the grid when we actually need it at the right times, in the right amounts, now we're changing the game. And we can do this through energy storage. So there are a few different strategies we can use. The first is called pump storage. Slide, please. This is the Pearl Hill project up in Bridgeport. So it's a pump storage. We pump the water up the big hill. When demand gets high, we pull the pin, the water falls down, spins the turbine, creates electricity, presto. So we have 3 big projects like this going on currently in Washington. Klickitat, in Coulee City, and this one in Bridgeport. The second, and I think is going to be an essential market for Washington State to capture, is the battery storage using huge batteries. Slide. Cue the huge, ginormous battery. This is UET battery. They're actually out of Mukilteo, Washington. They're leading the world nationally and internationally in battery storage, especially with vanadium flows. There are a few other technologies which are also emerging that would allow us to capture the energy of our renewable sources and give it a shelf life. The great thing about storage is it's going to decrease the maintenance and operating costs of wind, so we'll be able to take all that energy and put it directly into the batteries or the storage units. And also it gives solar 24-hour-a-day capability. The energy storage industry is set for positive disruption. A disruption that will lead to a fossil-free transition that we've been working for and waiting for. This is an industry Washington needs to capture and grow into an industry titan. Nobody makes industry titans better than Washington. We've got the track record to prove it. Yeah. Boeing, Costco, the list goes on. The energy containment industry will help mitigate the losses from fossil fuel generating plants, leading into the just transition we are calling for in the labor movement. Slide. Washington was the runner-up for the Tesla Gigafactory, which went to Nevada. We want this industry in Washington. We need to take the right steps to make sure we're not the runner-up again. 2 steps we need to establish to help streamline our efforts here is 1, setting a realistic, ironclad carbon timeline, utilizing an all-of-the-above approach, as well as establishing a carbon tax which actually supports our just transition. Thank you.
And so we know that the problem is real and the solutions are tangible. But to change everything, it's going to take everyone Next slide, please. And that's why the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy is made up of more than 170 organizations. This is a coalition of labor, environment, faith, small business, and community groups. And we've developed a powerful and innovative approach that will make clean energy solutions viable and make our economy and our communities grow at the same time. Now, we can be victims of climate change, or labor and community can come together and shape what our future looks like. This is the one place where resisting the economy for the 1%, defeating right to work, and building quality jobs and communities come together. Next slide, please. We have a plan and we're building a movement. We're talking to workers and communities about the challenges and the opportunities and engaging them in this campaign. Between now and November, we're going to host events all across the state. We would love to come and talk to your leaders and your members about the fight for climate justice. And we need to continue to recruit folks that will volunteer to help us with this campaign. We're going to have to collect signatures. Some of you might remember that from last year. We'll be counting on you again. You know who you are. And then, of course, continue to talk to voters and make sure that we're building our movement and passing this initiative in 2018. Next slide. Climate change is real, climate action is necessary, and now is the time to do something about it. So I'm asking all of you to pull out your climate justice steward card. Fill this out so we can collect your information and follow up with you. You can volunteer to collect pledges and get volunteers ready for our signature drive. You can help us with presenting and speaking about the Alliance to your local members and your leadership. Meet with VIPs in your community and ask them to endorse this effort, as well as help us organize events and lead those events. And whether you're new to this work or you're a seasoned campaigner, we'll be here to support you as you take on these roles. Next slide. But there are a number of other places where you can plug into this discussion about a clean energy economy and our fight for climate justice. You can reach out to the Martin Luther King County CLC and the Climate Caucus. Their email and their contact information is on the slide. You can also attend the Blue Green Alliance Summit in September. There's a flyer in your packet. Next slide. But make no mistake, the fight, next slide please, there we go, we're there. Make no mistake, the fight for workers' rights and the fight for climate justice is the same fight. We're facing the same opponents. These greedy corporations and the wealthy elite who want to control our economy, they don't want us to have a say in what our work looks like. And they want to make it harder for us to get ahead, and in fact, they want to make it harder for us to provide a better world for our children. Climate change isn't just about the environment. Climate change is about the future of our economy and the future of our work. And this is about the legacy that we, as leaders in our labor movement, leave behind. So I want to ask you, are we going to let these greedy corporations determine what our economy looks like? No! I knew you guys would have my back. All right. Are we going to let the people most impacted by climate change get left behind on the path to a clean economy? No! Are we going to miss out on jobs in this new clean energy economy? No! And are we going to let the wealthy elite write the rules? No. Hell no. That's right. Hell no. I like that. So we can use this fight for climate justice to grow and strengthen our union, but it's going to take all of us. So I want to thank you for your time this morning. Please fill out these cards so we can follow up, and I will be touching base with many of you to see if I can come and talk to your leaders and your stewards about our fight for climate justice. Thank you very much.